The Rockefeller Center Christmas tree towered 70 feet above the crowded plaza, each light a small promise against the December darkness, while fake snow machines added theater to the real flakes already falling. Scarlett Hollis stood in line clutching a crumpled dollar bill, her coat 3 sizes too large with duct tape holding the left sleeve together, breath forming small clouds in air cold enough to burn lungs. Around her, families in matching scarves laughed and sipped hot chocolate from paper cups that cost more than her mother's weekly grocery budget. The line shuffled forward with agonizing slowness, each child climbing onto Santa's lap with rehearsed wish lists about tablets and puppies and trips to Disney. Scarlett's fingers had gone numb an hour ago, but she refused to leave, refused to waste the subway fare it took to get here. Her sneakers had holes that let in slush, turning her socks into frozen sponges that squelched with every step. When her turn finally came, she approached the red velvet throne with steps that seemed too heavy for someone so small. The Santa, a tired man with a real beard yellowed from cigarettes, smiled with professional warmth that didn't reach his eyes. She climbed up without help, settling against his arm with the careful movements of someone used to not asking for assistance. His breath smelled like coffee and peppermint, the microphone clipped to his collar capturing every word for parents recording nearby. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" The words came with mechanical cheerfulness, his hand already positioned for the photographer's next shot. Scarlett opened her mouth, then closed it, her gaze dropping to the glittered floor where thousands of boots had tracked in city grime. She leaned closer instead, her lips nearly touching the synthetic fur trim of his collar. "It's Mommy's last Christmas." The words came out barely louder than the wind rattling the temporary barriers around the plaza. Santa's smile faltered for just a second before training kicked in, his hand patting her back in the mechanical way of someone who'd comforted hundreds of crying children. But Scarlett wasn't crying. Her eyes stayed dry as January pavement, her voice steady with the certainty only truth provides. She slid off his lap before he could respond, before the photographer could capture her face, disappearing into the crowd with the practiced invisibility of children who've learned that being noticed usually brings trouble. The elf stationed at the exit tried to hand her a candy cane, but Scarlett was already gone, swallowed by a river of tourists and their shopping bags. The cold hit harder outside the plaza's protective barriers, wind funneling between skyscrapers with enough force to make grown men stagger. Scarlett pulled her coat tighter, the duct tape crackling with the movement, and started the long walk toward the subway station on 47th Street. She'd saved enough for one ride home. Coming here had used the last of the coins she'd collected from between couch cushions and sidewalk cracks. Halfway across the intersection, her vision began to tunnel, edges going dark, like someone was slowly closing curtains. She'd skipped breakfast and lunch, saving the cereal for her mother who could barely keep down water anymore. The pavement tilted, became liquid, rushed up to meet her with the inevitability of gravity. Scarlett's knees hit first, then her palms, the impact sending jolts through bones that felt too light, too brittle. Someone screamed, high and piercing, but the sound seemed to come from underwater, distorted and distant. Her cheek pressed against concrete, still warm from the afternoon sun. The last thing she registered before darkness took her completely. Brennan Sheffield stood 20 feet away, his black overcoat catching snowflakes that melted instantly against the wool. He'd been leaving a meeting at the Rockefeller offices, his mind on spreadsheets and territory disputes, when the child's whisper to Santa had cut through the plaza noise with surgical precision. His men flanked him at a respectful distance, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd for threats that never materialized, because everyone could sense what he was. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw caught the Christmas lights, turning the ridged tissue into something that belonged more to battlefields than holiday celebrations. People moved out of his path without conscious thought, some primal instinct recognizing predator even wrapped in expensive tailoring. He'd stopped believing in coincidence the same night his wife and son had died in flames meant for him, but he'd heard the girl's words, heard the finality in that small voice, and something long dormant had shifted in his chest like ice cracking. Now she lay crumpled on the sidewalk, while tourists pulled out phones to film instead of help, their faces lit by screens capturing tragedy for social media. Brennan moved before his rational mind could intervene, his legs carrying him forward with the same certainty that had built an empire from blood and strategy. He reached her in 5 strides, dropping to one knee beside her small form with a grace that belied his size. His hand went to her neck, fingers finding a pulse that fluttered weak as a moth's wing, her skin cold enough to frighten him in ways that guns and knives never had. Around them, the crowd formed a loose circle, phone still recording, waiting for the narrative to unfold. "Call an ambulance," someone suggested. But Brennan was already lifting Scarlett into his arms, cradling her against his chest where his heart beat steady and strong. Her head lolled against his shoulder, that too large coat hanging off her frame like borrowed armor that had failed its purpose. He could feel her ribs through the thin fabric, count them like piano keys that would play only minor chords. His driver materialized from the crowd, the town car already pulling to the curb with the efficiency of men who anticipated their boss's needs. But Brennan shook his head, his eyes scanning the plaza until they landed on a coffee shop with steamed windows and the promise of immediate warmth. He carried Scarlett toward it, his overcoat falling open to shelter her better, one arm supporting her weight like she was something precious he'd found in rubble. The shop door chimed as he entered, conversation dying the instant customers registered his presence and the unconscious child in his arms. The barista, a college student with 3 nose piercings and tattoos crawling up both forearms, froze mid-pour, the espresso machine hissing into sudden silence. Brennan laid Scarlett on a leather couch near the gas fireplace, arranging her carefully, tucking his coat around her like a blanket that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Hot chocolate," he ordered without looking up, his fingers already searching her pockets with the professional efficiency of someone who'd frisked countless people. He found a crumpled receipt, a subway card with 1 ride left, and finally a piece of notebook paper folded into a tiny square. His hands that had broken bones and signed death warrants, trembled slightly as he unfolded it to reveal an address in the Bronx written in careful, childish print. The address was accompanied by bus directions, each transfer meticulously noted in purple crayon, the kind of planning that spoke of a child who'd made the journey alone before. Brennan's jaw tightened as he committed the street name to memory, his thumb tracing the careful loops of numbers that had probably taken her hours to perfect. Scarlett stirred against the cushions, her eyelids fluttering but not quite opening, a small sound escaping her lips that might have been a word or just exhaled breath. The barista approached with shaking hands, setting down a mug of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and a candy cane stirrer, her eyes darting between Brennan's scarred face and the child. Is she okay? Do you want me to call someone?" The questions tumbled out in a rush, genuine concern warring with the instinct to not question a man whose presence demanded obedience. Brennan waved her away with a gesture that was simultaneously dismissive and not unkind. He lifted Scarlett's head gently, supporting it in the crook of his arm, while bringing the mug close enough for the steam to warm her face. Her nose twitched at the smell of chocolate, that simple, reflexive response somehow more devastating than her earlier collapse. "Come on," he murmured, his voice dropping to something that might have been tender if anyone had been close enough to hear. "Just a sip. You're no good to anyone like this." The words were meant to be practical, but they came out rough with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Scarlett's eyes cracked open, revealing irises the color of storm clouds, confusion swimming in their depths before fear replaced it. She tried to pull away, her body going rigid with the panic of prey suddenly aware of the predator holding it, but Brennan's grip remained steady without tightening. "You fainted," he explained, keeping his tone level, factual, the same voice he used when explaining why someone's protection payment had increased. "Drank from Santa, walked, fell. You hit the ground hard enough to scare 20 people into filming instead of helping." Recognition flickered across her face, memory catching up with consciousness, and some of the tension leaked from her small frame. She looked at the hot chocolate, then at his face, studying the scar with the directness only children possess. No polite averting of eyes or pretense of not noticing. "My mom says I'm not supposed to take things from strangers." Her voice came out scratchy, unused, but steady enough to carry conviction. Brennan's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile if he still remembered how those worked. "Smart woman. Your mother." He set the mug on the side table, close enough for her to reach if she chose, far enough to not feel like pressure. "But right now, you need sugar and warmth more than you need caution, and we both know it." Scarlett considered this with the seriousness of someone forced to make adult decisions in a child's body, then reached for the mug with hands that shook from more than just cold. She drank carefully, small sips that suggested a stomach unused to richness, her eyes never leaving his face. "You heard me?" she said, after draining half the cup. Not a question, but a statement. "At Santa, you were there." The accusation carried no anger, just weary resignation, as if privacy was one more thing poverty had stolen from her. Brennan nodded once, sharp and definitive. "I heard." He pulled the paper from his pocket, unfolding it again to show her the address. "This where you live?" Her fingers tightened on the mug, knuckles going white against the ceramic. For a moment he thought she might lie, might give him a fake address or refuse to answer, but then her shoulders sagged with the weight of carrying too much alone for too long. Yes, the word came out small, defeated. But you can't. She doesn't like people seeing. The apartment. She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the hot chocolate surface where the whipped cream had melted into a swirl. How you live. Brennan finished the sentence with the bluntness he'd learned never to apologize for. How sick she is. How you're managing alone because there's no one else. Each statement landed like a diagnosis, clinical and irrefutable. Scarlett's chin trembled, but her eyes stayed dry. That same terrible control she'd shown with Santa, as if tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. She's dying, she whispered, the words barely audible over the coffee shop's background music playing sanitized holiday jazz. I know. Brennan stood, his full height suddenly imposing in the small space, and extended his hand toward her. Get your coat. We're going to see her now before you waste what's left of that subway card walking in wet shoes. She stared at his outstretched palm like it was a trap that might spring shut. Every instinct she developed on dangerous streets screaming warnings her desperation couldn't quite heed. But exhaustion won over caution, need over fear, and she placed her small hand in his, letting him pull her upright. The ride to the Bronx took 40 minutes through traffic that crawled like frozen blood, the town car's heated seats and leather interior, a stark contrast to the subway journey Scarlett had been preparing to make. She sat pressed against the far door, watching the city transform from gleaming towers to worn brownstones to buildings that sagged under the weight of deferred maintenance and broken promises. Brennan made 3 calls during the drive, his voice low and commanding, words like priority and immediately, and I don't care what it costs, punctuating conversations his men on the other end didn't question. Scarlett listened without appearing to, her reflection in the window showing a face too old for its years. They pulled up in front of a 6-story walk-up with crumbling brick and windows patched with cardboard, graffiti covering the ground floor and territorial markers that meant nothing to Brennan, but everything to the people who had to live here. The building leaned slightly left, as if tired of standing straight, scaffolding on one side suggesting repairs that had been abandoned mid-project. 4th floor, Scarlett said quietly, already reaching for the door handle. The elevator doesn't work. Hasn't worked in 2 years. She said it matter-of-factly. Another reality accepted because fighting it changed nothing. Brennan exited the car and came around to her side, his presence causing immediate ripples in the street's evening activity. Dealers pocketing their product, lookouts suddenly finding reason to be elsewhere, a woman shouting at her children to get inside now. He offered his hand again, and this time Scarlett took it without hesitation, her fingers small and cold in his palm. The stairwell reeked of urine and mold, the walls covered in water stains that bloomed like poisonous flowers, each landing marked by broken glass, and the detritus of lives lived in desperation. Brennan's jaw tightened with each flight, his free hand instinctively going to the gun at his hip, though no threat materialized. 4th floor, apartment 4C, the door hanging slightly crooked in its frame with 3 separate locks that Scarlett opened with keys she wore on a string around her neck. The apartment beyond was freezing, breath visible even in the small entryway, no sound of heating or running water or any of the background noise that signaled habitation. "Mama?" Scarlett called softly, slipping past Brennan into the darkness. He followed, his eyes adjusting to reveal a studio barely larger than his walk-in closet, dominated by a sagging couch where Nina Hollis lay beneath every blanket the apartment possessed, her breathing shallow and labored, each exhale a rattle that spoke of lungs filling with fluid they couldn't expel. Nina Hollis's eyes opened at the sound of her daughter's voice, milky with fever and confusion, struggling to focus on the massive silhouette filling her doorway. She tried to sit up, panic flooding features that might have been beautiful before illness carved them down to bone and translucent skin, one hand reaching instinctively for Scarlett, even as the other clutched the blankets like armor. "It's okay, Mama." Scarlett rushed to her side, climbing onto the couch to press against her mother's frail body. "He helped me. I fell, and he brought me home." The explanation came in a tumble, words tripping over each other in the universal language of children trying to prevent parental worry. Brennan remained in the doorway, giving them space, his presence somehow less threatening when he didn't advance. He could see it all now in the weak light filtering through newspaper-covered windows, the hot plate on top of a mini-fridge, the milk crates serving as furniture, the plastic bin catching water from a leak in the ceiling that had frozen into stalactites. Nina's gaze swept over him with surprising sharpness despite her condition, taking in the expensive coat and the scar, and the way he held himself with the absolute certainty of someone used to controlling everything around him. "Who are you?" Her voice came out reedy, broken by coughs that shook her entire frame. "Someone who heard your daughter tell Santa this was your last Christmas." Brennan spoke with the same directness he'd use in a business negotiation. No false comfort or empty platitudes. Someone who watched her collapse from hunger and cold on a street where 20 people filmed it instead of helping. Nina's eyes filled with tears that spilled over, tracking down cheeks hollowed by weight loss and dehydration. "I told her not to go," she whispered, each word clearly costing her. "Told her to save the money for food, but she said every kid deserves to see Santa once. She's 7 years old, and she's taking care of you alone." Brennan stepped fully into the apartment, closing the door behind him to preserve what little warmth their body heat generated. "How long since you've seen a doctor?" "Since anyone came to check on you." The questions landed like indictments, which was exactly how he meant them. Nina looked away, shame coloring what little complexion she had left, her hand tangling in Scarlett's hair with desperate tenderness. 3 months. The admission came barely audible. "The clinic said I needed specialist care, gave me referrals I couldn't afford, prescriptions I couldn't fill. The social worker stopped coming after I missed 2 appointments because I couldn't get down the stairs." Brennan pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts with practiced efficiency. Nina watched him with the wariness of someone who'd learned that help always came with strings attached, that kindness was just a down payment on future demands. "What do you want?" she asked finally, gathering what remained of her strength to meet his eyes directly. "Men like you don't help people like us without wanting something back. So tell me now, before my daughter gets her hopes up." The accusation carried no heat, just bone-deep exhaustion, and the bitter wisdom of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to believe in miracles. Scarlett stiffened against her mother's side, her small body going rigid with understanding beyond her years. Brennan paused mid-dial, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I want you alive," he said finally, with a simplicity that made it somehow more profound. "I want your daughter to have more than one memory of Christmas that doesn't taste like grief. That enough of an agenda for you?" Nina studied him for a long moment, searching for the lie, the hidden price tag, the inevitable betrayal. But whatever she saw in his scarred face must have passed some internal test, because she nodded slowly, settling back against the couch with visible relief. "Okay." The word came out like a surrender, or maybe permission. "Okay, but she stays with me. Whatever happens, wherever you're taking us, Scarlett doesn't leave my sight." The fierce protectiveness in her tone was the strongest thing about her, a mother's last line of defense. Wouldn't have it any other way. Brennan resumed dialing, bringing the phone to his ear. "Raphael? I need a medical team at..." He glanced at the address still clutched in his other hand. 4C, 847 Prospect Avenue. "No, not tomorrow. Now." "I don't care if you have to pull them out of Christmas dinner." He ended the call, and made 2 more in quick succession, each conversation brief and commanding, numbers discussed that made Nina's eyes widen despite her fog of sickness. Scarlett watched him with an expression caught between hope and terror, like someone witnessing a fairy tale that might turn into a nightmare without warning. Within 15 minutes, the building's ancient heating system shuddered to life with groans and bangs that made the walls tremble, warmth beginning to seep through vents that hadn't functioned in years. Nina gasped at the first wave of heat, tears streaming freely now, her body shaking with something that might have been laughter or sobs or both. "How did you..." "The landlord said it would cost thousands to fix, that we'd have to wait until..." She couldn't finish, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of warmth after months of slow freezing. Scarlett buried her face in her mother's neck, her small shoulders heaving. Brennan shrugged, pocketing his phone. "Your landlord will discover he's suddenly very motivated to maintain his properties to code, along with paying back every cent of rent he collected while letting people live in these conditions." His tone suggested the landlord's motivation would be delivered in a language universally understood by men who valued their kneecaps. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of the medical team, 2 doctors and a nurse carrying equipment that transformed the tiny apartment into a makeshift examination room. They moved with the efficiency of people who knew better than to question why they were making a house call at 8 p.m. on a December night, setting up monitors and oxygen tanks with practiced precision. "Mrs. Hollis, I'm Dr. Patterson." A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no-nonsense hands approached the couch. "We're going to get you stabilized here, then transport you to Mount Sinai for proper treatment. Your daughter can ride with you in the ambulance." Nina gripped Scarlett tighter, suspicion warring with desperate hope across features that had forgotten what either felt like. "I can't afford Mount Sinai. I can't afford any of this. The bills we'll lose the apartment, lose everything. Already handled." Brennan spoke from his position by the window, where he'd moved to give the medical team space. "You focus on breathing. Let me worry about the rest." The dismissiveness in his tone made it clear the subject wasn't open for negotiation. "Doctor." Patterson wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Nina's skeletal arm, her professional mask slipping for just a moment to reveal concern bordering on alarm. "When did you last eat?" The question came gentle but firm, the kind that demanded honest answers. "Yesterday. Maybe." Nina's words slurred slightly as the oxygen mask went over her face, pure air flooding lungs that had been starving for it. Scarlett needed. The cereal was running low and she's growing. She needs. The protest dissolved into coughing that racked her entire body. Scarlett climbed off the couch at the doctor's gentle urging, her eyes never leaving her mother's face, watching each rise and fall of her chest like she was counting them, banking them against future loss. Brennan found himself moving closer to the child without conscious decision, his presence a solid wall between her and the door, between her and anything that might try to take her away. "You did good, sweetheart." Dr. Patterson addressed Scarlett while checking Nina's vitals. Numbers, she murmured to the nurse, that made both women exchange significant glances. "Taking care of your mama like this. But now it's time to let us help, okay?" The ambulance ride took 20 minutes through streets transformed by snow into something almost beautiful, the city's sharp edges softened by white that would turn to gray slush by morning. Scarlett sat pressed against her mother's gurney, one small hand wrapped around Nina's fingers, while the other clutched the stuffed rabbit that had appeared from somewhere in the apartment's depths, worn bare in patches, one ear hanging by threads. Brennan followed in his town car, making calls that rearranged hospital hierarchies and bumped Nina Hollis to the front of every waiting list that existed. His driver knew better than to interrupt the steady stream of orders being issued in tones that brooked no argument or delay. Mount Sinai's emergency entrance blazed with fluorescent brightness, nurses converging the moment the ambulance doors opened, a choreographed dance of triage and efficiency. Nina was wheeled into a private room that materialized with suspicious speed, the kind of accommodation usually reserved for donors and politicians, walls painted soothing blue instead of institutional beige. Scarlett refused to leave, even when nurses suggested she might be more comfortable in the waiting area with juice and cookies. She planted herself in the chair beside her mother's bed, with the immovability of mountains, her jaw set in a line that reminded Brennan unsettlingly of his own stubbornness. "Let her stay." He appeared in the doorway, his bulk filling the frame, and the suggestion became policy without further discussion. A second chair materialized for him, positioned where he could see both the door and the monitors displaying Nina's struggling vitals in numbers that told their own grim story. The hours bled together, marked by shift changes and medication adjustments, and the soft beep of machines counting heartbeats like a clock running down. Nina drifted in and out of consciousness, her lucid moments growing shorter, the spaces between them expanding like darkness eating light. "Mr. Sheffield." A doctor approached just after midnight, clipboard clutched like a shield, his face arranged in the expression medical professionals practiced for delivering bad news. "Could we speak outside?" The glance toward Scarlett made his meaning clear. This conversation required euphemisms and careful wording. "Say it here." Brennan didn't move from his chair. "She's been living it. She deserves to hear it straight." The doctor's mouth opened to protest, met Brennan's eyes, and closed again, some argument dying before it could form. Stage 4 pneumonia, complicated by advanced heart failure and untreated diabetes. The words fell like stones into still water, each one creating ripples that would never quite settle. Her organs are shutting down. "We can make her comfortable, manage the pain, but how long?" Nina's voice interrupted from the bed, surprisingly clear despite the oxygen mask, her eyes open and focused with the terrible clarity that sometimes came at the end. "Don't dance around it, doctor. How long do I have with my daughter?" The doctor's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing the human underneath who hated this part of his job with a passion that never dulled. "Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hollis. If you'd come in sooner, if we'd caught it earlier." "I know." Nina cut him off with a gesture that said she'd already walked this road of what-ifs and recriminations in her own mind countless times. "Thank you for being honest." The dismissal was clear, and the doctor retreated gratefully. leaving the three of them in silence, broken only by the machine's steady rhythm. Scarlett's face had gone blank, all emotion draining out like water from a broken cup, leaving behind something that looked like her but felt hollow. She stared at her mother with eyes that had seen this coming, but somehow still weren't prepared, that had known and hoped and feared simultaneously. "Baby, come here." Nina patted the bed beside her with what little strength remained, and Scarlett climbed up carefully, mindful of tubes and wires, curling against her mother's side like she had when she was smaller, when the world was less sharp, and the future held more than grief. Brennan stood, intending to give them privacy, but Nina's hand shot out with surprising speed to catch his wrist. Her grip was weak but insistent, her eyes boring into his with an intensity that demanded he stay, that demanded he witness. "I need to ask you something." Nina's words came between labored breaths, each one clearly costing her. "And I need you to promise me, on whatever you hold sacred, that you'll tell me the truth." The formal phrasing suggested she'd been rehearsing this, planning for a moment she'd known would come. "I promise." Brennan settled back into his chair, leaning forward so she wouldn't have to strain to see him. The scar on his face caught the room's dim lighting, a roadmap of violence that somehow made his attention feel safer rather than threatening. "When I'm gone." Nina's voice cracked, but she pushed through. "What happens to her? The social workers, they'll come for her. Put her in the system where I can't protect her anymore. Foster homes that might be good or might be—" She couldn't finish. The possibilities too terrible to voice. The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Scarlett had gone completely still against her mother's side, barely breathing, every muscle tensed against the answer that would determine her entire future. "She stays with me." The words left Brennan's mouth before his brain could fully process them, instinct overriding the thousand logical reasons this was impossible. "I'll make it legal, make it permanent. She'll want for nothing, be safe from everything. This I swear to you." Nina searched his face for the lie, the crack in the promise, the inevitable betrayal that had to be lurking somewhere beneath the certainty. But whatever she saw in his scarred features and steady gaze must have satisfied something deep inside, because she nodded slowly, tears spilling from the corners of her eyes. "Okay." The word came out soaked with relief and grief in equal measure. "Okay. Scarlett, baby, look at me." She waited until her daughter's storm-cloud eyes met hers. "This man is going to take care of you when I can't anymore. You're going to live somewhere warm and safe, somewhere you never have to be scared or hungry or cold." 2 days before Christmas, Nina's breathing changed, becoming shallower, more labored, each inhale a battle she was slowly losing. The hospice nurse who'd joined their vigil adjusted morphine drips and spoke in hushed tones about comfort care and saying goodbyes, words that Scarlett had learned to hate with a ferocity that surprised even her. Brennan had left the hospital only twice, once to retrieve clothes, and once to handle what he called business, with a tone that suggested someone had made a terminal error in judgment. He returned each time with coffee he didn't drink, and food he barely touched, maintaining his post in the chair that had molded itself to his shape over 48 sleepless hours. The room had transformed into something almost homelike, through sheer force of will and unlimited resources, warm blankets that didn't scratch, pillows that actually supported, a sound machine playing ocean waves to mask the hospital's constant background noise. Scarlett had claimed the narrow couch by the window, refusing the comfortable hotel suite Brennan had offered, needing to be close enough to hear her mother's breathing even in sleep. "Tell me about Christmas when you were little." Scarlett's voice broke the 3 a.m. silence, her small form silhouetted against the window where snow fell in thick curtains. "Before everything got hard." "What was it like?" Nina smiled, the expression ghostly but genuine, her mind traveling back to better times that felt like someone else's memories. "My grandmother made pierogi from scratch, dozens of them, and the whole house smelled like butter and onions and potato. We'd hang ornaments made from salt dough, each one with our thumbprints pressed into the clay." Her voice grew stronger with the remembering, as if the past gave her something the present couldn't. There was this ugly ceramic angel she'd had since the 50s, chipped and faded, but it had to go on top of the tree every year. She said it had survived the journey from Poland in her suitcase, that it carried all our family's luck. "What happened to it?" Scarlett had climbed onto the bed without anyone noticing, curled into her mother's side with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent countless nights this way. "The angel, where is it now?" "In the apartment." Nina's hand found her daughter's hair, fingers combing through tangled strands with automatic tenderness, wrapped in newspaper in the box under the couch. "I was saving it for when you were older, for when you had your own tree to put it on." Brennan made a call, quiet and brief, speaking in code that nonetheless conveyed crystal-clear instructions. Within 2 hours, a Christmas tree appeared in Nina's hospital room, small enough to fit in the corner but real, filling the space with pine scent that masked antiseptic and approaching death. The ceramic angel, carefully transported from the Bronx, took its place at the top, its faded paint and chipped wings somehow perfect. "You got it." Nina's voice broke on the words, tears streaming freely down her hollowed cheeks. How did you—" She couldn't finish, overwhelmed by this small impossibility made real through money and connections and sheer stubborn will. "Told you." Brennan's tone stayed matter-of-fact despite the way his throat had tightened watching Scarlett's face light up. "Your job is breathing, mine is everything else." The division of labor made sense to him in ways that probably wouldn't survive rational examination. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of bright, cold sunshine that made snow sparkle like someone had scattered diamonds across the city. Nina had declined steadily through the morning, her periods of wakefulness growing shorter, her responses slower, the machines tracking her decline in numbers that told their own inevitable story. The hospital chaplain came by at noon, was politely declined, and retreated with the relieved expression of someone who'd fulfilled obligation without having to witness actual grief. A social worker attempted to discuss arrangements, and met a wall in the form of Brennan's flat stare and single-word response. Handled. Scarlett sat cross-legged on the bed, holding her mother's hand, singing Christmas carols in a voice that wavered, but never quite broke. Nina mouthed the words she couldn't speak anymore, her eyes tracking her daughter's face with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every freckle, every eyelash, banking images against an eternity without them. "I love you, baby girl." The words came at 4:17 p.m., clear and strong despite everything, Nina's last burst of clarity before the final slide. "You're going to be okay. You're going to have the life I couldn't give you, and you're going to be so happy. Promise Mama you'll be happy." "I promise." Scarlett choked on the words, finally crying, hot tears that had been building for days spilling over in a flood that shook her small frame. "I promise, Mama. I promise." She pressed her face against her mother's chest, listening to the heartbeat that was slowing, stopping, letting go. Nina's free hand reached blindly across the bed, found Brennan's without looking, gripped it with surprising strength. He stood and moved closer. This man who'd been a stranger 4 days ago, now the witness to the most intimate moment of 2 lives ending and 1 transforming. "Take care of her." Nina's eyes locked onto his, fierce and fading simultaneously. "Love her like she's yours. Protect her from everything. Give her the childhood I couldn't." Each command fell like a vow being extracted, a contract written in breath and desperation. "On my life." Brennan's voice came low and certain, his scarred hand covering both of theirs. Nina's skeletal and cold, Scarlett's small and trembling. "On everything I am and everything I have. She'll never want for love or safety or anything else as long as I'm breathing." Nina's face relaxed then, the last lines of tension smoothing out as her eyes slid closed. Her chest rose once more, fell, and didn't rise again. The machine's steady beeping flatlined into a single sustained note that somehow seemed louder than any scream. Scarlett didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stayed pressed against her mother's still chest, as if she could will the heart beneath it, to beat again through sheer desperate need. Brennan's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her against his side, while his other hand reached up to close Nina's eyes, with a gentleness that contradicted every rumor whispered about him in dark corners. The nurse came in, silenced the machines with practiced efficiency, offered condolences in the tone of someone who'd done this too many times. Brennan waved away the offer of grief counseling and victim advocates, his attention entirely on the child who'd just become his responsibility in every way that mattered. "She's not alone anymore." He spoke to Nina's body with the formality of a promise made to the dead. "I'll make sure she knows she was loved, that you fought as hard as you could, that she was worth every sacrifice you made." The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had to offer across the divide between breathing and gone. The funeral took place on a gray morning 3 days after Christmas, the cemetery covered in snow that muffled sound and made everything feel distant, unreal. Scarlett stood between Brennan and the grave, wearing a black coat he'd bought her that actually fit, her hand gripped in his with a strength that suggested she might never let go. The service was small, a handful of Nina's former coworkers who'd tracked her down through obituaries, a neighbor from the Bronx who'd sometimes shared soup, and Brennan's driver standing at a respectful distance. The priest spoke in platitudes about God's plan and better places, words that bounced off the assembled group without penetrating. Scarlett didn't cry. She'd used all her tears in that hospital room, left them soaked into her mother's blankets and Brennan's shirt during the long night after. Now she just stood silent and pale, watching the casket lower into frozen earth, with eyes that had gone somewhere far away. "You can say goodbye." Brennan crouched beside her after everyone else had left, his overcoat spread to shield them both from wind that cut like knives. "Or you can say nothing. Either way is okay. There's no right way to do this." Scarlett stepped forward, picked up a handful of snow from the grave's edge, and let it fall onto the casket with a soft thump. "Goodbye, Mama," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I'll make you proud. I'll be happy like I promised." Then she turned and walked back to the car without looking back, her spine straight with a composure that was somehow more heartbreaking than tears. They were halfway back to Manhattan when Brennan's phone rang, the caller ID showing his lawyer's name. He answered with a grunt, listening to whatever was being said on the other end, his jaw tightening with each passing second. When? The single word came out sharp as breaking glass. How did he even find out? No, don't answer that. Someone talked. Someone always talks. He glanced at Scarlett in the rearview mirror, saw she was staring out the window, unreachable in her grief. "Handle it. File the emergency injunction. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call and met his driver's eyes in the mirror, a silent conversation passing between them that needed no words. The car changed direction, heading toward downtown and the family courthouse where apparently Scarlett's father had decided to make his reappearance into her life. Who was that? Scarlett's voice came small and careful, like she already knew the answer would hurt. "What's happening?" Her fingers twisted in the fabric of her new coat, creating wrinkles in the expensive wool. "Your biological father." Brennan didn't believe in lying to children, had learned from his own childhood that knowing the truth, however ugly, was better than discovering you'd been deceived. "He's filed for custody. Says he wants to take care of you now that your mother's gone." The laugh that burst from Scarlett's throat was bitter and old, completely wrong coming from someone her age. "He wants the money," she corrected flatly. "Mama said he'd come if he thought there was something in it for him. He never wanted me before, not even when she begged him for help." Brennan's hands tightened on his phone until the case creaked. "Tell me about him." The request came gentle despite the fury building in his chest like a storm gathering strength. "Everything you remember, everything your mother told you. I need to know what we're dealing with." Scarlett's recitation came emotionless, reciting facts like she was reading from a police report. "His name is Trevor Walsh. He left when I was 2, before I can really remember. Mama said he took her savings and her grandmother's jewelry when he went. He'd show up sometimes over the years asking for money, making promises he never kept." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "Last time was 8 months ago. He wanted to borrow $3,000 for some investment that couldn't miss. Mama had just been diagnosed, was trying to save for treatment, and she told him no. He called her names I won't repeat, and said I'd been a mistake he should have prevented. The driver took a corner harder than necessary, tires squealing slightly, as if the car itself was angry." Brennan made another call, this one to someone named Raphael, who apparently specialized in digging up information that courtrooms found compelling. "Everything you can find on Trevor Walsh, last known address somewhere in Queens, history of theft and abandonment." He rattled off details Scarlett provided. Birthday, social security number Nina had made her daughter memorize in case of emergencies. "I need it yesterday, and I need it damning enough that no judge on earth would give him custody of a goldfish." The courthouse steps were slippery with ice, crowds of people navigating custody battles and divorce proceedings, and all the ways families could splinter and break. Brennan kept Scarlett close, one hand on her shoulder, guiding her through the chaos toward a conference room where his lawyer waited with a stack of files thick enough to use as a weapon. Trevor Walsh was already there, sitting across the table in a cheap suit that didn't quite fit, hair slicked back with too much gel. He looked up when they entered, his eyes sliding past Brennan to land on Scarlett with calculation so naked it was obscene. "There's my girl." He stood, arms spreading like he expected her to run to him, smile stretching across a face that bore no resemblance to the child he'd abandoned. "Daddy's here now, sweetheart. Gonna take you home. Take care of you like I should have been doing all along." Scarlett pressed harder against Brennan's side, her face draining of color, hands balling into fists in her coat pockets. "You're not my father," she said clearly, her voice steady despite the trembling that ran through her small frame. "You're just the man who left. There's a difference." Trevor's smile faltered, irritation flashing across his features, before he caught himself and forced the expression back into place. Now, Scarlett, I know you're upset about your mama, but we're family. Blood. That means something. Even if some rich stranger's been filling your head with— Sit down, Mr. Walsh. Brennan's voice cut through the room like a knife. Quiet, but carrying enough menace to make Trevor obey before his brain caught up with his body. Before you embarrass yourself further by pretending this is about anything other than money. The door opened to admit Judge Patricia Hawthorne, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every manipulation family court could offer. She took her seat at the head of the table, opened the file before her, and surveyed the assembled group with the expression of someone already exhausted by what she was about to hear. Mr. Walsh, you're petitioning for emergency custody of your biological daughter based on your parental rights. She read from the documents without inflection. Despite having no contact with the child for the past 3 years and sporadic involvement before that. Would you like to explain your reasoning? Trevor leaned forward, arranging his features into something he probably thought looked sincere. Your Honor, I admit I made mistakes. I was young, stupid, not ready to be a father. But I've changed, got my life together, and when I heard about Nina's passing, he paused, manufactured a catch in his voice that wouldn't have fooled a first-year drama student. I knew I had to step up, do right by my daughter. Interesting. Judge Hawthorne's tone suggested she found it anything but, because according to the documentation here, you've been served with 6 separate restraining orders over the past decade, have outstanding warrants in 2 states for check fraud, and owe over $40,000 in back child support you've never paid. The color drained from Trevor's face as she continued reading, each revelation landing like a physical blow. His lawyer, a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, started shuffling papers with increasing desperation. There's also testimony from neighbors documenting threats you made against Ms. Hollis when she refused to loan you money for gambling debts. The judge's eyes lifted to pin Trevor in place. Multiple witnesses describing incidents where you showed up intoxicated, damaged property, and had to be removed by police. Brennan's lawyer slid a manila folder across the table, its contents spilling out in a cascade of evidence that had been compiled with the ruthless efficiency money could buy. Bank statements showing Trevor's attempts to access Nina's meager savings, text messages with explicit threats, photographs of him leaving a casino 3 hours before his daughter's mother was buried. The police report from your most recent arrest is particularly enlightening. Judge Hawthorne pulled out a document near the bottom of the stack. Attempting to sell prescription medications you'd obtained fraudulently. That was 2 weeks ago, Mr. Walsh, while your daughter's mother was dying and you couldn't be bothered to visit. Trevor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his lawyer placing a restraining hand on his arm that was immediately shaken off. You can't just— I have rights. She's my blood, my daughter, and some thug with money can't just— Mr. Sheffield. The judge turned her attention to Brennan, who'd remained silent throughout the proceedings, his presence alone more commanding than any testimony. I understand you've been caring for Scarlett since her mother's hospitalization. What exactly is your relationship to this child? Brennan stood, pulling Scarlett gently to stand beside him, his hand steady on her shoulder. 4 days ago, I was a stranger who overheard this child tell Santa it was her mother's last Christmas. I found her unconscious on a sidewalk, malnourished and hypothermic, because she'd given her last food to a dying woman who had no one else. His voice stayed level, factual, but something underneath it made the room feel smaller, more focused. I stayed with them every day and night until Nina Hollis passed. In her final moments, she asked me to protect her daughter, to give her the life she couldn't. I made that promise, and I intend to keep it. You have no legal standing. Trevor's lawyer finally found his voice, grasping at straws with visible desperation. No biological relationship, no prior guardianship arrangement. The law is clear that parental rights supersede. The law, Judge Hawthorne interrupted, her tone glacial, also accounts for abandonment, for demonstrated unfitness, and for the best interests of the child. Which brings me to you, Scarlett. She addressed the girl directly, her expression softening slightly. I know this is hard, but I need to hear from you. Where do you want to live? Who do you want to take care of you? Scarlett looked up at Brennan, then across at Trevor, the comparison so stark it needed no explanation. Him, she said, pointing at Brennan without hesitation. He was there. He kept his promises. He made Mama warm before she died, and made sure she wasn't scared. That's who I choose. Trevor slammed his palm on the table, the crack echoing through the small room like a gunshot. You can't let a 7-year-old make this decision. She doesn't understand what's best for her. Doesn't know this man could be anyone, could be dangerous. The only danger in this room is you. Brennan's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but Trevor's mouth snapped shut mid-sentence, some survival instinct finally kicking in. You abandoned your daughter when she was in diapers. You stole from her dying mother. You threatened a woman too sick to defend herself, and now you want to profit from the child you never wanted. Judge Hawthorne held up her hand for silence, her eyes scanning the final pages of the file before her. Mr. Walsh, I'm denying your petition for custody. Furthermore, I'm terminating your parental rights effective immediately based on documented abandonment, failure to provide support, and demonstrated unfitness. You can't do that. Trevor lurched to his feet, his chair clattering backward. I'll appeal. I'll fight this. His lawyer grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, but Trevor shook him off with violence that made Scarlett flinch. You'll do nothing. The judge's gavel came down with finality. Because if you come within 500 feet of this child, you'll be arrested for violation of the restraining order I'm also issuing. Are we clear, Mr. Walsh? Her tone suggested that lack of clarity would result in immediate consequences. Trevor's face had gone purple with rage, veins standing out in his neck, hands clenched into fists at his sides. This isn't over. You think your money makes you untouchable? You think you can just steal my kid and— His rant cut off, as 2 bailiffs appeared at his shoulders, their presence a silent but unmistakable suggestion. Brennan didn't even look at him, his attention entirely on the judge who was now signing documents with practiced efficiency. Mr. Sheffield, I'm granting you emergency temporary guardianship, pending a full evaluation. You'll need to complete the standard background checks and home studies, but given the circumstances, I see no reason this won't become permanent. She paused, her pen hovering over the final signature line, and looked directly at Scarlett. Young lady, if at any point you feel unsafe or unhappy, you tell someone. A teacher, a doctor, anyone. Just because I'm making this legal doesn't mean you don't have a voice. Understood? Scarlett nodded solemnly, her hand finding Brennan's and squeezing tight. Yes, ma'am, but I won't need to. He already saved me once. He'll keep doing it. The simple faith in her words carried more weight than any legal document could. Trevor was escorted from the room, still sputtering threats that became increasingly incoherent as distance and bailiffs muffled them. His lawyer followed with mumbled apologies and the resigned air of someone who'd known from the start how this would end. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like finality, like the end of one chapter and the beginning of something entirely different. Judge Hawthorne gathered her files, stood, and extended her hand to Brennan with a smile that transformed her severe features into something almost warm. Take care of her, Mr. Sheffield. Something tells me you're exactly what she needs, even if it's not the conventional choice. She leaned down to Scarlett's level, her voice gentling. You're a brave girl. Your mother would be proud of how you handled yourself today. The penthouse overlooked Central Park from 40 stories up, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a view of the city that sparkled like a jewelry box spilled across velvet. Scarlett stood pressed against the glass, her breath fogging it in small circles, watching ice skaters trace patterns on Woolman Rink far below. She'd been living here for 2 weeks, still waking some mornings convinced it was all a dream she'd wake from to find herself back in the freezing apartment. The bedroom Brennan had given her was bigger than her entire former home, decorated in soft blues and grays that somehow felt both expensive and comforting. You don't have to stand so far away. Brennan spoke from the kitchen where he was attempting to make hot chocolate, following a recipe on his phone with the same intense focus he probably applied to business negotiations. You're allowed to sit on the furniture, touch things. This is your home now. Scarlett turned, studying him with the directness children possessed before society taught them to look away. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms marked with scars that told stories he'd probably never share. The domestic scene, this dangerous man wrestling with marshmallows and cocoa powder, felt surreal in ways that made her chest tight. It doesn't feel real yet, she admitted quietly. Like maybe I'll do something wrong and it'll all disappear. Like maybe you'll realize I'm too much trouble and— She couldn't finish. The fear lodged in her throat like something solid and choking. Brennan abandoned the hot chocolate, crossed the space between them in 3 strides, and crouched to her eye level. Listen to me, Scarlett. I don't make promises I can't keep. I told your mother I'd take care of you, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. There's nothing you could do that would make me send you away. Understand? She nodded, tears threatening for the first time since the funeral, her eyes burning with the effort of holding them back. Why? The question came out barely a whisper. Why did you help us? Why do you care what happens to some kid you don't even know? The question hung between them, loaded with more weight than her years should carry. Brennan was quiet for a long moment, his scarred hands resting on his knees, considering how much truth to share with someone so young who'd already seen too much. Because 6 years ago, my wife and son died in a car bomb meant for me. The words came flat, emotionless, a wound so old it had scarred over into numbness. I stopped believing in second chances, in goodness, in anything except survival and revenge. Then I heard you whisper to Santa, and something shifted. Scarlett's eyes went wide, her hand reaching out instinctively to touch his arm in comfort, this child who'd just lost everything offering solace to a man who'd lost everything years before. I'm sorry, she breathed. That's worse than my mama. At least I got to say goodbye. Yeah, you did. Brennan's voice roughened slightly. And watching you fight for every second with her, taking care of her when you should have been taken care of, it reminded me that there's still good in the world, that maybe I could be part of creating something good, instead of just breaking things. The hot chocolate boiled over on the stove, hissing and smoking, breaking the moment. Brennan cursed softly and moved to turn off the burner, wielding a dish towel like a weapon against the mess spreading across expensive granite countertops. Scarlett laughed, actually laughed, for the first time since her mother died, the sound startled out of her by the sight of the most feared man in the city, battling chocolate splatters with increasing frustration. You're really bad at this, she observed, moving to help with paper towels. Yeah, well, my skill set tends toward other areas. He surveyed the disaster with rueful acceptance. How do you feel about ordering from that place that makes the hot chocolate with the little marshmallows shaped like snowmen? The suggestion came with a half smile that made his scarred face almost approachable. They ended up on the couch with takeout hot chocolate and Chinese food from containers. Scarlett couldn't quite believe were real. Everything she'd dreamed about walking past restaurant windows with her mother, unable to afford even the cheapest items. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Brennan picked at his own food with the distraction of someone whose mind was elsewhere. Tomorrow's Christmas Eve, he said eventually, setting down his chopsticks with the decisive movement of someone making a decision. I was thinking we should get a tree. A real one, big enough to matter. Your mother mentioned that ceramic angel. Figured it deserves a proper tree to sit on. Scarlett's throat tightened, the food suddenly difficult to swallow. You don't have to do Christmas just because I'm here. I know you probably don't celebrate anymore after... She gestured vaguely, unable to voice what she meant, but trusting he'd understand. I haven't, Brennan admitted. Not in 6 years. Just another day to get through. Another reminder of what I lost. But maybe... He paused, choosing words carefully. Maybe it's time to try something different. Build new memories instead of just living in old ones. The next morning, they went to a Christmas tree lot in Brooklyn that smelled like pine and fresh-cut wood, the ground covered in needles that crunched underfoot. Scarlett walked among the trees with reverent silence, her hands trailing over branches, testing their strength, searching for something perfect. She chose one that stood 8 feet tall, full and symmetrical, with branches that seemed designed for holding ornaments and memories. Brennan paid without blinking at the price, arranged delivery for that afternoon, and then surprised her by suggesting they go shopping for decorations. The craft store overwhelmed her with options, aisles of glittering possibilities, ornaments in every color and shape imaginable. Scarlett froze in the entrance, her eyes wide, clearly having no framework for how to navigate abundance after a lifetime of scarcity. Pick whatever you want. Brennan handed her a shopping cart that was almost as big as she was. Fill it up. We're starting from scratch, might as well do it right. He said it casually, but watched her face carefully for signs she was overwhelmed or shutting down. She started slowly, adding items with careful deliberation. Silver balls and blue ribbons, a string of lights that promised to twinkle like stars, wooden ornaments shaped like animals that could be painted. Then momentum built, the cart filling with the kind of mismatched collection that reflected a child's joy rather than a decorator's vision. Brennan added his own selections when she wasn't looking. A premium tree stand, extra lights because you could never have too many, and at the last minute, a box of salt dough ornament kits that let you press your thumbprint into the clay. The reference to what Nina had shared in the hospital went unspoken, but understood. Back at the penthouse, they spent the afternoon transforming the living room into something that looked like Christmas had exploded across every surface. Scarlett stood on a step stool hanging ornaments with intense concentration, while Brennan wrestled with light strings that seemed determined to tangle despite his best efforts. "You're doing it wrong." Scarlett's observation came matter of fact, without judgment. "Mama always said you have to start from the inside and work out, otherwise you get gaps." She climbed down and demonstrated, her small hands weaving the lights through branches with practiced efficiency. Brennan watched her work, learning. This man who commanded empires taking instruction from a 7-year-old without ego or impatience. They worked in companionable silence, broken only by occasional direction or requests to pass ornaments, the ease between them growing with each shared task. The ceramic angel emerged from its newspaper wrapping like a relic from another life, its faded paint and chipped wings somehow more beautiful for their imperfection. Scarlett held it carefully in both hands, her fingers tracing the crack along one side that Nina had said came from the journey across the ocean in her grandmother's desperate flight from war. "She's perfect." Brennan had appeared beside her with the stepladder, positioning it carefully beneath the tree's highest point. "Ready to put her up?" He held the ladder steady, his large frame kneeling to bring the first rung within her reach. Scarlett climbed slowly, each step deliberate, the angel cradled against her chest like something that might shatter if she breathed wrong. At the top, she stretched upward, arms fully extended, placing the angel exactly where it belonged, presiding over this new beginning like a blessing from everything that came before. "I miss her." The confession came soft and broken as Scarlett descended, sitting on the ladder's second rung instead of coming all the way down. "Every morning I wake up and remember all over again that she's gone, that I'll never hear her voice, or feel her hug me, or—" Her voice cracked completely, tears finally spilling over. Brennan lifted her down, pulled her against his chest, and let her cry in a way he hadn't when she'd stayed silent and composed through the funeral. These tears felt different, healthier somehow, like poison draining from a wound that had been festering beneath stoic composure. "Missing her means she mattered," he said into her hair, his own voice thick with things he usually kept buried. "Means the love was real. You carry that with you, Scarlett. She's not gone as long as you remember her, as long as you let yourself feel this." His arms tightened, protective. This man learning in real time how to comfort a grieving child. She cried until she was empty, until the tears stopped, not because the grief was gone, but because her body simply had no more to give. When she finally pulled back, wiping her face on her sleeve, Brennan handed her a handkerchief from his pocket, monogrammed, expensive, and completely impractical for actual use. "Better?" he asked, though her red eyes and blotchy face made the answer obvious. She nodded anyway, managed a watery smile that transformed into a yawn so huge it made her jaw crack audibly. "Come on." Brennan scooped her up without asking permission, carrying her toward the bedroom that still felt too big, too clean, too full of things she was afraid to touch. "Tomorrow's Christmas. You should sleep. Dream about your mom watching you from wherever she is. Probably annoyed I can't make hot chocolate without creating a disaster." He tucked her in with the awkward care of someone learning a new skill, pulling blankets up to her chin and making sure her stuffed rabbit was within reach. The nightlight he'd bought her, shaped like a moon, cast silver shadows across walls that smelled like new paint instead of mold and desperation. "Will you stay?" Scarlett's hand shot out to catch his wrist before he could leave. "Just until I fall asleep? I don't like— the dark is bigger here, different than before." The admission cost her. This child who'd been forced to be brave for so long asking for comfort felt like weakness. Brennan settled into the chair beside her bed without hesitation, his bulk making the furniture creak in protest. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, and something in his tone made it sound like he meant more than just tonight, more than just until she fell asleep. Scarlett's eyes drifted closed, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of sleep within minutes, the exhaustion of grief finally claiming what her will had held at bay. Brennan stayed exactly where he was, watching her small chest rise and fall. This responsibility he'd claimed without fully understanding what it would cost or give him. His phone buzzed with messages he ignored. Business that seemed suddenly less urgent. Problems that felt smaller in the face of this sleeping child who'd lost everything and still found the courage to hope. The city glittered beyond the windows, Christmas Eve settling over New York like a blanket of lights and possibility. In 4 days, Scarlett Hollis had transformed him from a man who existed in shadows and violence into someone who bought Christmas trees and learned to make hot chocolate and promised dying women he'd protect their daughters. The change should have terrified him, should have felt like weakness, but instead it felt like waking up from a 6-year sleep. He thought about his wife and son, the way their deaths had hollowed him out and left only rage and emptiness where love used to live. But sitting here watching Scarlett sleep, he felt something shift. Not replacement, but addition. Not forgetting, but making room for new memories alongside old grief. The ceramic angel caught the moonlight from its perch atop the tree, its chipped wings casting shadows that danced across the living room like they were moving, flying, carrying prayers from Earth to wherever the dead went to watch over the living. Brennan found himself actually hoping, that Nina could see this, could know her daughter was safe and warm and loved. Christmas morning arrived with snow falling thick and silent, the city muffled under white that made everything look clean and new. Scarlett woke to find presents under the tree, not the mountain of excess that money could buy, but thoughtful selections that showed someone had paid attention to who she was becoming rather than who grief had temporarily made her. Books about brave girls and adventures, art supplies for the drawings she made when she thought no one was watching, a locket that opened to hold 2 pictures, Nina on one side, space left blank on the other for whoever else she chose to claim as family. She opened each gift with reverent slowness, her face cycling through wonder and grief and tentative joy. Brennan watched from the kitchen where he was attempting breakfast with marginally more success than his hot chocolate disaster, scrambling eggs that were only slightly burned, and toast that was merely dark instead of carbonized. The domesticity felt foreign, but not unwelcome. This new language he was learning one awkward gesture at a time. "Thank you." Scarlett appeared beside him, the locket already around her neck, her arms wrapping around his waist in a hug that caught him completely off guard. "For all of it, for staying, for keeping your promise to Mama, for making me feel like maybe I can be okay again someday." He set down the spatula, turned, and returned the embrace with the same fierce protectiveness he'd felt that first night when he'd carried her unconscious form off a freezing sidewalk. "You're going to be more than okay," he told her with absolute certainty. "You're going to be extraordinary. Your mother made sure of that." They ate breakfast at the window overlooking the park, watching the world wake up to Christmas morning. Families bundled against the cold, making their way to celebrations and traditions, and the messy beauty of lives lived together. For the first time in 6 years, Brennan didn't feel like an outsider looking in at something he could never have again. "What happens now?" Scarlett asked through a mouthful of slightly burned toast, her practical nature already looking ahead to what came after this moment. "Do I go to school? Do you have to work? How does this," she gestured between them, "actually work in regular life? Now we figure it out together." Brennan poured her more orange juice, the simple act of caretaking feeling both strange and right. "You'll start school in January. We'll establish routines, learn how to be a family, even if it looks different than what most people expect. There's no manual for this, Scarlett. We're making it up as we go." She considered this with the seriousness she applied to everything, then nodded slowly. "Okay, as long as—" She paused, searching for words. "As long as you promise not to pretend. I don't need perfect. I just need real. I need to know you're not going to smile and say everything's fine and then leave like everyone else." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. This child laying out terms for trust like she was negotiating a contract she'd been burned by before. Brennan recognized the armor in her words, the protective distance she was trying to maintain even while reaching for connection, because hope had betrayed her too many times to accept it without conditions. "You know what your mother told me in the hospital?" He set down his coffee, giving her his full attention. "She said you were stronger than anyone she'd ever known, that you'd survived things that would break grown men. She was right, but Scarlett, you don't have to be strong all the time anymore. Not here." Scarlett's fingers traced the edge of her plate, drawing invisible patterns in the crumbs left behind. "Mama used to say that too, but then she'd get sicker, and I had to be strong because someone had to keep things together. If I fell apart, who would make sure she took her medicine? Who would count the pills to make them last longer?" The weight of responsibility she'd carried pressed into every word, years of being the parent when she should have been the child. Brennan felt rage kindle in his chest, not at her or Nina, but at a system that let a 7-year-old become a caretaker, at a world where poverty forced children to grow up before they'd finished being young. "I promise." Brennan met her eyes directly, understanding the weight of what she was asking. "No pretending. If I'm frustrated, you'll know. If I don't know what I'm doing, I'll admit it. We tell each other the truth, even when it's hard. Deal?" He extended his hand for her to shake, making it official. Her small hand disappeared in his scarred palm, the handshake sealing something more binding than any court document. Outside, The snow continued falling, covering the city's ugliness and temporary beauty, promising that even the darkest winters eventually gave way to spring, and new growth and second chances that neither of them had thought to hope for. Later that afternoon, Brennan's phone rang with a number he'd been expecting, the social worker assigned to their case for the mandatory home visit. He answered while Scarlett was occupied with a new puzzle, his voice dropping into the professional tone he used when civilian authorities needed managing without being overtly intimidated. The visit was scheduled for the following week, procedures explained in bureaucratic language that boiled down to strangers judging whether he was fit to keep the child he'd already sworn to protect. He agreed to everything with patience he didn't feel, understanding that cooperation now meant permanent custody later, that sometimes you had to play by rules you found absurd. Who was that? Scarlett looked up from her puzzle, pieces of a winter landscape scattered across the coffee table, her ability to sense tension in his voice already finely tuned from weeks of learning to read him. You sounded different. Official. Social worker. He didn't believe in hiding the machinery of their new life from her. They have to come check that I'm taking proper care of you, that the apartment's safe, that you're adjusting. Standard procedure when someone gets guardianship. Nothing to worry about. We'll pass with flying colors. The confidence in his voice left no room for doubt. The last Christmas of Nina Hollis had become the first Christmas of a family forged in grief and unexpected grace. A child who'd whispered to Santa, and a man who'd heard her. Two broken people learning that sometimes the family you choose in the midst of darkness shines brighter than any you're born into. And the ceramic angel, survivor of wars and journeys, and now witness to new beginnings, presided over it all with chipped wings that had learned long ago that perfection was never the point. Thank you all for following this story. If it touched your heart, write in the comments from which place you're watching this unfold, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing these stories to you. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest miracles come wrapped in shadows, scars, and the courage to love again.